Let's go.
Welcome to the Trusted Leader Show. I'm your host, David Horsager. Join me as I sit down with influential leaders from around the world to discuss why leaders and organizations fail, top tactics for high performance, and how you can become an even more trusted leader.
Today's show is sponsored by Sourcewell.
Welcome to the Trusted Leader Show. It's David Horsager. We have a special guest today. He's a dear friend of mine. He's been a senior Trust Edge consultant. He's created his own business all around courage. He's played professional basketball in Europe. He's a grandfather, a husband, and he's a friend and really an influencer of many. Thank you so much for being on today, Dave Cornell.
David, it is such an honor and pleasure to be with you. I am so looking forward to our conversation today.
Likewise. This is going to be super fun. And before the end of the day, we're going to look at something very specific around courage and how you can be a more courageous leader. And certainly, people often ask me, as far as trust, is that you talk about those C's that came out of the research, those 8 C's, those 8 pillars of trust. If there's another C, what would it be? And I said, immediately, it would be courage. It takes courage to build trust often and just to lead well and be a trusted leader. So we're going to jump into that. But before we do, hey, let's let people know you a little bit. Tell us 3 things that we should know about Dave Cornell.
Wow. 3 things that you should know about me is, I guess, I'm a family guy. That I think is first and foremost, one of the things that I love. I'm a husband of my wife, Amy. We've got 2 daughters, Sarah and Caitlin, our son-in-law, Tyler, and then we've got 4 grandkids, Hallie, Josiah, Troy, and Theo. And they are all the joys and the loves of my life. I am a believer. I'm a Christian. And that first and foremost is really what guides me and directs my paths in everything that I do. And then I'm a big sports fan, and I'm a guy that loves to laugh. I'm kind of a humor snob, I'll say. It takes a lot to make me laugh, but I love to laugh, and so I think I might have given you 4 there, but hopefully that's okay.
That's good. You are, and you're a fun guy. And what people don't know about you, and I've said this often, I think he's the best leadership coach in the country. And Dave Cornell, in fact, we were just talking about, and Dave, you still work with us, and even though you run your own business, and you still do, for our clients, help solve some of the biggest trust challenges they have. And you, in fact, just yesterday, we got a sincere testimonial from the dean of a widely known, big, prestigious university in the United States, a testimonial of the work you've done with some of their senior leaders that have been immensely impactful. And of course, you've been on many of our projects, a lot of our work with our Enterprise Trust Index, a big project with a global pharmaceutical that just had a merger and is working on building trust. And you've been intimately involved in that Trust Edge project. And I could talk about all these projects. I've seen the testimonials, which is why we keep needing you and wanting you to be on these projects. But you've been a friend, and I'm proud of that and grateful for that. And your coaching has made me better. So, we talk about trust and we talk about being a trusted leader. And a lot of times that starts with our own habits, these little things we do. What are some things you kind of make sure you do? You're a seasoned leader. You've been in big companies. You've created your own company. You're an entrepreneur. But what are things you do to be a high trust leader every day?
I think when it comes to habits, reading is one of the things that I've really embraced over the last several years. I've always been a reader, but really have embraced it these last several years, and looking for books that challenge me, that help me to grow. There's some people that I love to read. Bob Goff is one of the guys that I love to read. Patrick Lencioni is another one. Mark Batterson, Tony Dungy. Those are some of my favorite authors that that they're books that are fun to read, but they also challenge me and they help me to grow. One thing I haven't done as well as I would like to over the last several years, but I'm getting into it more and more now, is exercise. And I just got back a little bit ago from a 2.5 mile walk. We're at about 30 degrees here right now up in Fergus Falls, Minnesota. But to get outside and get some exercise and some fresh air really clears my mind and helps me to process the things that I'm reading, process the people that I'm coaching. And so those, I think, really are two of the habits that have been very helpful for me. Reading and exercise are huge.
Funny about the walking. I said this on a different episode, but when I lost the 52 pounds in 5.5 months about a decade ago, and I've kept most of it off, one person that inspired me was an executive coach that said the best exercise for you, David, will be actually walking. Not, a lot of people think the best exercise is swimming, and I certainly like to swim now and do triathlon, some of these kind of things. But back then, he's like, start by walking, and walking with weights specifically. He believes cross-country skiing is the best exercise there is, even though he was the most highly decorated UCLA swim coach for, 56 national champions, something crazy like that. He said, walking with weights, getting the weight above your heart. So I was one of those crazy guys for a long time that walked around with weights above my, but pumping little 5, 10 pound weights. But walking is so great, a forever activity, certainly.
Well, thank you, David, for that tip on with the weights, because that's something I'm not doing and can incorporate very easily.
Well, he talked about 60% more heart health by just getting a weight, even your hand, above your heart. So little interesting idea. He recommends 5-pound weights. I've gotten up to where I like to do 10 or 8, but I can go quite a while that way, and I do some different things with them. Then switch it up a little bit with my hands. But anyway, it's a good idea, and he made a big impact on my life change toward living healthier for sure. So love that. My parents, 91, Dad's 91 now up on the farm, but they go, I call them and Mom will say, every morning, Mom, yep, I just got back from my 4.5 mile walk. Yep, wow. I just got back from my 2.5 mile walk. So it seems to work for people in many ways, certainly.
Yep.
So
yep.
Let's go to that reading. Sometimes I have the quote in speeches where at least at one point when I did the research or saw the research, the average hours a person watches television annually, which is usually kind of not that great of input, 1,287 annually. Average number of books an American reads in their lifetime, at least over 200 pages, where it's not just a kid book when you're putting the kids to night, was one average after their formal education was done, whether that was a high school degree or a PhD. And that reading can be such good input. The late famous Charlie Jones said you're going to be the exact same person today in 5 years as you are today, except for the people you surround yourself and the books you read. So there's other ways to get input electronically today, but books are certainly one of the best thought out, valuable places to gain insight. And we're going to get into the book that you've written, but tell us about when, that habit's hard for people because it's not you don't have to do it. You have to eat, you have to sleep. When do you carve out time in your busy schedule as an entrepreneur, a consultant, a grandparent? And when do you carve out time to do it? What's the discipline there?
I'm fortunate to be part of a mastermind group every Wednesday morning where we go through a different book every month. And so it's a book that's selected for our group. There's 6 to 8 of us, depending on the Wednesday. Not everybody's always able to join us. But that has been a great discipline for me, knowing that we're going to discuss whatever chapters were assigned for that week. And so it's a matter for me, probably 3 or 4 nights a week, where I'll just sit down in the living room and start reading my book. And depending on how much time I'll have, but it's just, again, it's my wife and I, we're empty nesters. And so we've got time in these COVID times in particular, rather than turning on the TV. And I'm not saying that I never do that. I do. But I always try to carve out, some time 3 or 4 nights a week to read.
I love it. That also speaks to accountability, and you and I both have seen the same statistic, which if you have a goal, you have 10% chance of accomplishing it. If you have a goal with accountability, you have 95% chance of accomplishing it. You've got that accountability built in every week to get better, and I love that. And I'm sure the value goes even up because you discuss it.
Oh, without question. And it's with people who obviously are looking at the book from their perspectives. So they share insights with me maybe that I didn't pick up. And that discussion, as you mentioned, David, is so huge in helping us to build each other up and encourage each other up and to pick up insights that maybe we missed.
Love it. What motivates you these days to do the work you're doing?
Wow, that's an interesting question. And it goes back, we talked before about the coaching. One of the things that I love to do in my work is I love to help people have aha moments. And in the coaching that we do around the Trust Edge book, there are people that as I go into the coaching with them and ask them questions, it has happened virtually every time where I get people to go, wow, I'd never thought of that before. And I love helping people get better. And for me, that's what I'm passionate about. And when people can start to see things in a different way, that's what drives me and what motivates me is to help people to get better and to help people to see things in a different way and to overcome things that they maybe thought that they could never overcome.
What does that look like? What is it to be a great coach? Because I see the feedback when I know the trust work, but the way you coach it, how do you get the best out of it? How do you help them have an aha moment that actually has some, people throw out transformation, but we've seen real transformation. We've seen it happen. How do you actually help create a petri dish where that can happen?
It's an interesting thing, Dave. One of the things that I like to do with every coaching client is I like to start with the DISC behavioral profile. What that does is it helps me to see how the person I'm coaching, how they view the world. And then as I coach them, I can ask them questions based on how they see the world and help them to recognize that not everybody else sees the world the very same way that they do. And that really is an eye-opener for people. I know the first time that I took the DISC when I was 32 years old, wow, it was a smack upside the head. And I thought at that point in time, if you didn't see the world the way that I saw it, that you were wrong and you needed to get with the program. And so that's why I like the DISC, is because it helps people to recognize, that there are different ways to see the world, that different people see it differently. And so it helps me to coach them, give them a better coaching process, because I can help them to begin to see how they see the world and that not everybody else sees it in the same way. Then it comes down to listening and asking really good questions. So I think those are the keys for me. So
as a coach that helps people transform, and certainly you got to have the right content. We believe in this trust content. But how we do it, any other tips on whether it's my daughter or my executive or my manager, any other tips on whether it's specifically, questions I ask or kind of a framework, anything else on what I could do to be a better coach as a trusted leader?
I think so much of it comes down to, like, specifically when we're talking about the kinds of questions we ask, it's important to ask, obviously, open-ended questions so that you give people the opportunity to really start to dig deep. And a question I love to ask, and I remember when I was going through my coaching certification, they told us never ask why. And I believe that that's one of the best questions that we can ask, because it really puts people in a position where they have to start to dig deeper. So much of what we do in our lives are defaults. We just act and react because that's the way that we've always done. And we don't think about why we do things the way that we do them. And so I think it's about asking good open-ended questions and then beginning to challenge and go deeper with people, and asking people, again, another great question. How do you feel about that? How do you think the other person feels about it? How do you think the people that report to you feel when you respond in that way? So I think getting those feeling questions, which are hard for a lot of people to process and to respond to, but those are the things that I like to do as a coach.
You just maybe jump back to about a decade ago. got invited to Larry King's home. You know, many of our younger generation, probably my producer over here, Kent, won't even know that name. But at the time, you know, he was the most known journalist in the world. And I'm there with a few leaders in his amazing, you know, I think Rodeo Drive and wherever it was there in California. And we're gathering in his living room, and, you know, we get to ask him a few questions. I remember the question said, you know, you are known as the best question asker in the world. I mean, you're the greatest journalist in the world. You've interviewed every president and every, you know, but you couldn't find somebody he hadn't interviewed that was a celebrity, right? Yep. On Larry King Live. And what's your favorite question to ask? And without hesitation, Larry said, "Why?"
Wow. Yeah.
And he said, because why motivates people.
Yeah.
Why shows their purpose. Why gets under their kind of their motivation for all the other things. So he said, now, as you know, in my work on clarity, I believe the greatest question to take an idea to an action is how.
Yes.
But the motivating question is the why. So fun to hear you say that. And you gotta, if you're gonna coach people, you gotta know their motivations, right?
Yeah,
so
exactly.
No doubt about
right.
it.
Yep.
So you're big on helping people get better, and I want to especially get to your courage work in a moment, but how are you getting better these days?
Well, I think one of the real blessings for me, David, has been working with you. And the work that I've had the opportunity to do with the pharmaceutical company that you reference has really helped me to grow, because I've been doing stuff for you that I've not done in the past. So I'm digging deeper into the trust work as I prepare for the presentations that I'm doing. So that's been tremendous in helping me grow. The book club that I mentioned earlier has been a tremendous benefit to me in helping me to grow. As I look at one of the projects that I'm working on right now is creating an online course for myself. And that, again, is taking me to places that make me uncomfortable and are requiring me to grow and do things that I'm not comfortable doing. And anytime we step out, we grow. And so I've been fortunate with the work I'm doing with you, with my mastermind group, and now with this project that I'm working on. Those are things that are helping me to grow right now.
Hey, it's Ann with the Trust Edge team here. As you know, we are passionate about helping you and your team perform at your best. And that's why David wrote his new book, Trusted Leader. This true-to-life parable follows the story of a CEO who uncovers the root issue threatening his organization's success. And in the back half of the book, David provides a roadmap for even how to solve those root issues. Get Trusted Leader for your team, your organization, or even just for yourself at trustedleaderbook.com.
Well, Dave Cornell, everybody that knows you, other than a really fun guy, a really tall guy, a really great guy, if they were going to put one word to Dave Cornell, they would say Dave Cornell knows courage. And you're the courage expert. You've written this book. Everybody can find it and go to Amazon. It's Cultivate Courage. And so I want to jump into this a little bit. Tell us where this came from.
You know, I lost my job back in January of 2010, so 11 years ago now. And at the time, I didn't realize how bad the economy was. That was the recession time, December or 2008 to 2012, 2013. I thought I'd find a job pretty quickly, but I didn't. My wife lost her job 13 months later. Over the course of that time, I was diagnosed with situational depression. And with the help of a wonderful counselor, she helped me to recognize the role that fear had played in my life and the need to begin to do things courageously. During that time, we didn't lose our home, but we ended up having to sell our home as we went through all of our savings. And so we were in our mid-50s in 2011 now. We had no jobs, we had no home, and we had no money. And so I had to start because I wasn't finding work, I had to start to find ways to create work. You were instrumental in that, David, in that process for me. But then also with the help of this counselor, beginning to recognize how fear had really held me captive for many, many years. And I began to write down the things that I was learning with my counselor, and this book and the talk, the presentation that I give on courage, all developed out of that process.
And I was fortunate enough to get to write the foreword to the book. And I still remember the story I wrote in the foreword. So, I'm 12 years old. I'm riding my horse. I get my foot caught in the stirrup. I get drug and between the legs and think I'm going to die under the horse because only one leg is caught in the saddle at 12 years old when that horse is running across the field and I'm being drugged on the ground. Finally, my foot slips out. And my dad, a quarter mile away, sees it, comes over to me, and I'm scared to death. I'm shaking. I'm okay. And I remember what he says. Oh, I don't even know if he had to say it because we knew this about horses. Get back on the horse.
Wow.
Not for me as much, maybe for me too, but what you can do is you can ruin a horse if you don't get back on, and they think they can get away with that. And you hear that all the time. That horse is ruined. No one can get on that horse again because of somebody didn't get back on. And I knew I had to get back on that horse. And I remember 12 years old shaking and sitting on that horse. And I knew, little tears. And my dad knew how hard it would be for me, but he knew I had to do it for me and for the horse. And sitting on that horse and walking home. And I'm grateful for that moment of the push. Sometimes a push or an encouragement toward courage when you don't feel like it can be the thing. And I see you doing that with our team and as a certified and a senior consultant for us, with others that we serve, but also with your own clients, of how you're kind of this push toward take the next step, to be of courage. And I'm grateful for my dad, doing that for me. But tell us kind of the core concept of, I want us to get into the frame a little bit because I think that was so valuable for me when you led through it. But maybe before that, this whole courage, what can we learn? We're scared as people. You and I both see imposter syndrome in leaders. In our work, we've been able to work with presidents of countries and presidents of companies, and we know underneath it, many of them are looking a certain way, but they're scared to death that they're going to be found out, and they're scared to make the courageous choice. What would you say to them?
Well, I think that the real key here, David, and it's interesting you tell the story that you share in the foreword. One of my favorite quotes that I share often when I speak comes from John Wayne, the movie Cowboy. Courage is being scared to death, but saddling up anyway. And so this is not about becoming fearless. We often hear and people say, it's all about becoming fearless. And I think if we strive to become fearless, we're never going to do anything. It's about recognizing the need to be courageous. And I think one of the things that I talk about first is never underestimate the value of a crisis. I look back at that time when my wife and I lost our jobs and lost our home. It was a crisis time in our lives. I can tell you today, though, because we went through that time, we are better people for it. And I'm glad that it happened. Doesn't mean I ever want it to happen again, but it's in those crisis times in our lives where we learn and we grow and we're challenged to do and become what we don't think that we can become. And then I outline really 3 points in the book, and we can discuss them to whatever level you want to, David. But first is to name your fear. You have to acknowledge that you have this fear. Maybe it's a fear of having a difficult conversation with an employee. Maybe it's a fear of applying for a position that you don't think that you're quite ready for. It's all kinds of, but it's about naming it, acknowledge it. I say it's like being an alcoholic or a drug addict. If we're not willing to acknowledge it, we're never going to change it. Step 2 is to frame your fear. Begin to see your fear in a whole different way. And I think we'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit, David. And the last is to claim your courage. And courage is about taking steps, not knowing what the second step is going to be. So we know that maybe on the first step, it's to go online to fill out the online application. That's step 1. We don't know what step 2 is. That's what courage is. Courage isn't waiting for everything to be all lined up. Courage is stepping into our fear, not knowing what's next.
I love it. So let's take someone through it. We've got all different levels of challenges, but people have been through last year with the pandemic. They had to fire people they should have fired or let go earlier. They waited because they weren't courageous to do it.
Yeah.
You had people that should have had difficult conversations. They were too scared to do it, and their companies are tanking because of it. So let's take the CEO, the leader. They got a really difficult thing. They've named it. It's a difficult discussion. It's a difficult conversation. But what about that jumping into the frame once they've named it?
Yeah, you have to, we see everything in a certain way, and the frame is much like a picture frame. We start in the upper left-hand corner with the word see, S-E-E. The way that we see things about people or other situations impacts how we're going to feel about something. So we go to the upper right-hand corner, feel. What we feel affects what we do, which is the lower right-hand corner. What we do affects what we get, the outcome, and then our get takes us back up to our see. So in essence, it's the self-fulfilling prophecy. So if we only see something in one way, and we continue to feel and do and get the same result, we're not going to get anywhere. So we have to begin to see things in a different way. And let's take the CEO who has a difficult decision to make. For me, the epiphany moment in this journey, David, was recognizing that this kind of fear that holds us back, this irrational fear that holds us back, is selfish. And by that, what I mean is, if I've been given the gift, and this was my case now, if I've been given the gift of communication and the gift of telling stories and sharing them in a way that will make a difference for others, and I don't do that because I'm afraid I'm not good enough, I'm afraid nobody wants to hear what I have to say, but yet that's my gift, that's selfish on my part to not share it. That was the epiphany moment, the recognition of, whoa, if I don't do this, that's selfish. So let's take a look at the CEO who has an employee that needs to be let go. And this employee is impacting other people around them. It's impacting their bottom line, but they're afraid of what this employee might do or say, or they've had a personal relationship with them, and so they're afraid of what might happen with that. And yet, keeping that person on is impacting everybody else. It is selfish to hang on to that employee for personal reasons because it's having an impact on the organization, it's having an impact on employees, and you likely are losing other employees who are leaving because they don't see you taking action. That's a kind of a quick summary. Hopefully that made sense.
I love it. I think that's reframing it to selfishness and understanding that we're selfish when we don't when we don't act courageously.
Exactly.
But it's still scary, Dave.
Yes.
It's still scary. I don't want to. How am I going to, come on, I need something more. How am I going to see it differently?
Well, I think one of the things that you need to do is you need to visit with trusted people. You need to sit down and have conversations with people that you trust and share that fear. Again, it goes back to step number one, acknowledge it, share it, write it down on a piece of paper, get it out. There is, when we live in fear, it holds us captive, and getting it out, verbalizing it or sharing it takes some of the power away. And so I think first and foremost, and I'm hoping that most CEOs have a group of trusted friends that challenge them, that encourage them. And I think that's where it starts, is you have to share it with somebody else. Get their input, get their feedback. And you know what happens when we do this, David, is they say, that happened to me. Let me tell you what I did, and let me tell you the difference that it made. And so it's so critical, again, first to get it out. Then you need to begin, as you begin to frame it and see it differently, you need to begin to write out, okay, here's how I see it now. What other ways might I see this? Wow, I didn't even think about it impacting my other employees. I didn't even think about it impacting my clients, and yet it does. So we have to begin to see, what is the impact, not just on the personal piece with this employee, but what is the impact with everything around? And then we have to begin to have a strategy to courageously step into it. We have to have a plan. So, okay, I've got this employee and I need to let him go. I'm going to set the date that on, Monday, January 11th, I'm having this conversation with this person. I'm going to sit down with HR and go through, make sure we've got all our ducks in a row. But you need to have a plan on here's what we're going to do, here's why we're going to do it, and make sure that all of your HR appropriate steps are in place so that you can do it. But it's naming it, framing it, and then taking those courageous steps. And it's hard, David, you're right. And I'll tell you, sometimes it's hard to be the courage guy because I have these recognitions of my need to be courageous.
You don't get a pass.
Yeah,
You're
that's exactly right.
That's right. That's the same with trust. We're in a glass bowl. It's like, hey, you talk about trust, you better, be perfect, right? Live perfectly. That's why in workshops, the first thing I say, or speeches or whatever, is like, I'm not perfect at any of this. I just know it's true from the research, right? I like it. This is great. So if I saw it, I went through this process of framing. Mm-hmm. Then in that third, the claim courage, where is the plan?
Well, the plan, and I outlined some different steps in there that I did. The plan can be very different for each person. But I think one of the very simple steps in this process is recognizing the power of the word maybe. I used to tell myself, David, and you helped me a great deal in this process, but I used to tell myself I wanted to own my own business and be a speaker. But I would tell myself very definitively, even though this is what I wanted to do, I could never make my living as a speaker and a coach and a trainer. And then I learned with the help of some friends, putting the word maybe in front of that. Maybe I could never make my living as a speaker and a coach and a trainer. But then what happens is there's a little crack of hope in that. And hope is such a powerful thing. And then it's about, again, the process for everybody is going to be very different. But when you say, I can't let that person go, maybe you can't let that person go, but maybe you can. And then you begin to outline, okay, how am I going to do this? And that may be different for everybody. So that's one of the things that's hard with this, David, is to give a very definitive process. But I think the first thing is to recognize what is the first step that you need to take. And maybe the first step is simply, I need to decide that I'm going to let this person go.
Yeah, I love it. So before the plan, this is great. The power of maybe. Maybe gets kicked around like it's a bad word. Yeah. And actually it gives hope. And I think it's interesting. The last podcast I had, basically the gift that this person's dad, who happened to be the principal of a school in a very tough area of Chicago, said what he gave those students in urban Chicago was he gave them hope. I mean, there is such power in hope, right? And I think for me, when I learned a way to lose weight back when I lost the 52 pounds, people say eat less, exercise more. That wasn't clear enough, right? But when I got an idea, it actually gave me hope. And so I think if this maybe cracks open the door for hope, if we can give hope, there's a whole lot of power. Like we start to believe this could happen. And that's the start of a mind shift that really matters right here.
Yeah. And David, you're so right. It's all about the mindset. And I remember and this is some friends that taught me the frame and taught me the word maybe from an organization called Top 20 Training that do amazing work in schools. And they allowed me to use this work in my work. And that word maybe and hope is such a critical piece. And again, for me as a Christian, it was a whole revelation for me to recognize that power of hope and to get people to see that maybe I can't, but you know what? Maybe I can. I think of Roger Bannister, the first man to ever break the 4-minute mile. And people said it would never happen. No one will ever break the 4-minute mile. But Roger Bannister did, and he put that word maybe nobody will, but maybe somebody, and I don't remember what the statistics are, but over the course of the next 2 years, there were like another 10 or 12 people that did it because of the power of hope.
Hey, it's Sam from the Trust Edge team. Most training and development initiatives don't last or even solve the root issue hindering your organization. That's where Trust Edge coaching certification comes in. Trust Edge coaches are equipped with a suite of tools to identify, benchmark, and close gaps in trust for good. Because when you solve the real issue, you get measurable results in a culture where people actually want to make an impact. So whether you're a coach with your own clients or a leader training people inside your organization, check out trustedgecoaching.com and see how you can start solving the root issue and get lasting results in your business. And now back to the show.
So if I'm going to do the process basically, and not to oversimplify it, people should get the book, Cultivate Courage, and hire you and hire us. maybe they should.
Maybe,
anyway,
yes.
but you're going to name the fear, you're going to frame the fear, and then you're going to claim courage. But am I right here when at the creating the plan stage for dealing with that? Is that going to be right before number 3? Claiming courage? Is it part of number 3?
It's part of number 3. It's, first of all, you have to recognize, hopefully after steps 1 and 2, you recognize time for me to do something courageous. So how am I going to do that? And that's where you begin to step into that courage. And one of the things that I talk about, it's one of the steps, is recognize that the fear will always be there. So again, as I said, this is not about becoming fearless. It is rather about becoming courageous. So step 1 is to recognize the fear will be there. When you have that conversation with that employee, you're likely going to be a little bit scared about what it's going to be like. But if you've done your homework and done all the things you should do in advance, you can go into that knowing that you can handle that difficult conversation. And so it's about taking little steps, not knowing maybe what the next step is even going to be. And that's often the case.
I love it. A process for being more courageous, and it doesn't mean you won't be fearful there.
Yes.
In fact, as we know, fear can be very good. Fear is a great thing. I'm so glad, I'm scared to walk in the middle of the road when a semi comes by. I'm so, scared. I don't want to, get too close to that cliff. I'm so glad. I'm scared of taking drugs for what could happen, right? I mean, the fear is such a great thing, but it can be terrible. And that's when we need to have courage. So how has this worked with your trust work? You've been doing so much trust work. You've been doing so much courage work. How have you put them together, and how's that worked?
I think it's been really interesting, the synergy between courage and trust, and really the synergy between each of the pillars. And I'll give you one example. We'll start with the first pillar, the pillar of clarity. So often I have in coaching, or I found myself in this situation where a manager or a leader will be up in the front of the room and they'll say, here's what our plan is for the next year, and here's what our expectations are. And I'm sitting there confused, and the manager or leader will say, any questions? And I'm sitting there looking around, nobody's raising their hand. And so I think I must be the only one who's confused here. And so in clarity, it's about the courage to ask the question, hey, I'm not sure what's expected of me here. Can you go through that again for me? And so often we sit back, and then when the meeting's over, we go talk with somebody else by the water cooler, and they say, did you get what he just said? And it's about having the courage to raise your hand and ask the question. It's about having the courage as the leader to say, you know what? I know I often don't communicate very well. So, hey, Bill, just so I know I've communicated appropriately, can you tell me what I've asked you to do? So that's an example of the courage to ask the questions just in the clarity pillar. And it happens in every single pillar. And I know we don't have time to go through all of them, but that's one example, David.
I love it. Courage to ask the questions. I was just thinking about that. One of the little quick ideas we teach managers is ODC. Make sure you've given a clear outcome, clear deadline, clear, and left room for clarifying questions. And that deadline, people just don't want to give it because they're scared to death that it'll create conflict, when not giving it will create conflict. And I am very clear here at the Institute that I am not good at all these things I teach. And I'll tell you what, Ann has the courage every time to say, David, what's the deadline then? You teach this stuff, but what's the, and she'll stand up in front of everybody. By the way, you didn't do, you name the deadline. So it's great to work with people that have the courage and creating an environment where people can have it.
Yeah. And David, the interesting thing too, is a lot of the reason that people don't want to give deadlines is because then they have to hold people accountable. And it takes courage to hold people accountable. And that comes back to the commitment pillar. And so courage is interwoven in all the pillars, really.
Every one of them.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, do you have any, by the way, sometimes we get to this in just our daily lives. People love to hear habits, and you gave a few of those, but do you have any like tips, just favorite productivity tips even for how we got so many busy leaders listening today. Any tips that you, as a routine or, as a habit, or ways you deal with things that help you stay effective and efficient, even in just the little tasks?
Yeah. And I've never been a great list person, but I've got a list right in front of me of the things that I want to accomplish this week. And I know, David, that's something that you teach and something that that you affirmed in what I was doing. And so for me, it's about what is it that I want to accomplish this week and how am I going to go about getting that done? I think that is truly a simple one that many, many people talk about, but not many people really fulfill that and live that out.
DMAs, difference-making actions. I wrote about them in both the first two books, but every day now, Ann leads it, but the team comes around for a 5-minute meeting, stand-up meetings, and everybody just gives one DMA for the day, and then the next day they have to report on it. Just what's the top thing? What's the most important thing? Of their 5, 3 to 5, what's the most important thing? Interesting what happens when that just gets in front of you, have it written down and that kind of thing. Simple idea, but certainly an important one.
Yeah.
Well, there's a whole lot more we could cover in Cultivate Courage and a whole lot more we could cover with your work. Maybe before I get to the lightning round, any other highlights, for you in work life, business life, this courage work? I'm thinking of that principle you came up with. It was really fun for us to see for the pharmaceutical we were working with. But what are some little highlight takeaways when you've seen people be transformed and people are getting it?
Wow, that's a great question. And for me, it's when I get an email from somebody or maybe even a letter from somebody and they tell me that they have begun to step out in courage. And I had a lady share with me, this is a year after she had heard me speak. And she went back, was challenged by what I had to share with her. And she didn't do anything about it. She just dwelled in that fear for a year of calling out somebody. It was a nonprofit, calling out the head of her board who had been sexually harassing one of her employees. And it took her a year to do something about it, but she did, and it changed her life. And others. And others, exactly. And so I think for me, just hearing those stories of people who have made a change, who have had the courage. This gentleman that we're coaching right now, that I'm coaching right now from the university that we've talked about, just the change that he is making. And again, that's what drives and motivates me. So I love when I see people beginning to see differently. It comes back to the frame. They've seen one way and now they've started to see another way.
I love it. The old psychology, thoughts lead to desires, which lead to actions. What I see leads to what I think about and desire, which leads to how I act. And it's the same with the frame and the same with courage. So a clear, simple 3-step process for courage, a simple, clear frame, but you got to do it. And like we say around here, you got to do the work. So let's jump to a lightning round here. What's right now, you gave a bunch of your favorite authors, so we'll just jump to what's a favorite resource or book right now specifically?
I just finished up reading Bob Goff's Dream Big book. And I love how he writes. He's got so many stories, but particularly as I think about this online course I'm in the process of developing, it was so good for me, so challenging for me, and helped me to be in the process of dreaming bigger than what I normally might have done. And that book was critical in helping me through this process.
Something really fun about that. We read a book in the evening with our kids, getting older all the time, but we read Love Does by Goff, and boy, that was fun and some out loud laughter, but also inspiring. Go take a chance, go do it,
Yes.
But I'll tell you a really fun podcast, listening to it yesterday, because of the 4 authors you named, you can put 2 of them together, and just this last podcast by Bob Goff, he has Mark Batterson on. You talk about big thinkers together in one podcast. They are a lot of fun and a lot of inspiration. So
I'll have to find that one.
Very, very cool. It's on his Dream Big podcast, but he has Mark on, and Mark's going to be on our show here before long. So any favorite quote?
Wow. I'm going to share this. This is one of my quotes. And it's one that I try to step into every day. Fear calls us to be spectators. Courage calls us to get in the game. And that's a quote that came out of a particular story that I share when I speak, of me being put into a high school basketball game in a situation that I didn't think that I was ready for. And fear keeps us in the stands. Courage gets us in the game, gets us active, gets us doing things that we don't think we could ever accomplish. And here's one of the key things too in this, David, is that when we are courageous, it not only makes a difference in our lives, but in the lives of the people around us. And so we have to recognize that when we're courageous, when we're fearful, we're selfish. When we're courageous, we are spreading who we are and the gifts that we've been given. And so for me, that's one of my favorite quotes. And I don't know if it's fair to use one of my own, but that's one that's really impactful for me.
Well, I love it. We know your humility already, so I'm glad you used your own, because I really appreciate that. Well, it has been a great conversation. What's one thing in your life, one thing you have left to do? You really want to do that. By the way, I think of courage with you. I remember when you told me years ago, I don't know if I'll live past 50, right?
Yeah.
Because in your family, basically no one had. And look at you now, a couple decades almost. More.
Closing in on that.
Closing in. But I mean, think about, what do you have left to do? What's on the bucket list item here that you're thinking, boy, I sure hope this is something I'd like to see happen?
Well, for me, it's this online course, and I've got a deadline of March 1st. And, sharing it with you and your listeners, now it becomes even more, I'm more accountable to it now. And, but just knowing that the impact that this can have on people, if they, knowing the impact of learning to be courageous in my own life, and how other people can do that as well, and the impact that spreads. It's kind of the pebble in the pond theory. Hopefully I can impact a few people who then can impact more and more and more, just like you do in your trust work, David. And so I'm going to say, even though I've got a shortened deadline on it, that for me, I think is the next big step. And then some longer term goals are, I'd love to do courage workshops, where we bring people together and they share dreams that they might never think that they could do, but with the help and support of other people, they can be encouraged to be more than they ever thought they could be. And they can get out of the stands and get into the game.
Love it. I love it. There's a second book there. So where can people find out about more? I got one last question for you, but before that, where can we find out more? Everybody can come to Trust Edge to find you, but where do we find out about courage?
And I've got my own website, cultivatecourage.com, and you can go there and find out the work that I do there, the training that I do, the speaking that I do. I've got a blog that I haven't done much with the last couple of months, but was pretty consistent with, and I'll start back up here in a couple of weeks on that. So cultivatecourage.com. You can find my book on Amazon. Just type in the title, Cultivate Courage. And so those are really the two places that I would love to connect with people on my website. I've got a Facebook page as well, Cultivate Courage. So I'd love to connect with people there too.
Cultivate Courage. And all these sites and links will be in the show notes, trustedleadershow.com, and we'll make sure they're in there. So final question. The show is the Trusted Leader Show. Who is a leader that you trust, and why?
Well, David, I'm going to go with you. And you just have had such an impact in my life, and I see you live out those 8 pillars. And I know that you say that you're not perfect at them, but you have been a mentor to me. You have helped me in more ways than you can even imagine. And I think just being able to apply, again, we go back to the pebble in the pond. I'm one of those outer rings of the pebble, when you jumped into the pond with your trust work, that's had an impact on me. And I'm just very, very grateful for that. So I hope that that's okay to use you as my trusted leader in that.
Very kind. I didn't set that up at all, but
no,
thank
he
you.
Didn't. He didn't.
Thank you, Dave. And it's been a delightful friendship, and it's been so fun to see all you've done. Well, that is our conversation for today. Thanks for joining us on the Trusted Leader Show. Dave Cornell, thank you so much for being on. Thank you for your work. Thank you for being our friend, and thanks for the framework around courage today. And we just are grateful to know you and partner alongside with you. So we will see you all next time on the Trusted Leader Show. And until then, stay trusted.